Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Today I'm going to be working on my larch forest, doing a general cleanup of the landscape and a little bit of pruning up top. Every year I go through this ritual, cleaning up all the old needles that have fallen off the larches, getting the forest planting ready for spring, and I always use the tweezers. It takes a long time, but it's always nice to get it cleaned up. It shows me the passage of time, getting it ready for spring, because spring will be here before we know it. Up top in the forest, I can see some branches that I missed in pruning. You can see there's one here that comes from the tree way back further. There's a few I missed. There's another long one here. There's a long one in here that comes forward. There's a couple here. You know, this branch comes from this tree and it's sticking out into the profile of another tree. So there's a lot of kind of pruning I can do that you just can't do when the trees are full of needles. That's one nice thing about larches, is you see that bare silhouette every winter, so you can do a really nice and accurate structural prune to the trees. I'm going to begin today by cleaning up the landscape of all the needles. So here I go. Somewhere in here is a dry waterfall. So I'll expose it all once again. I've had many people comment, how can you be bothered removing all the needles by tweezers? But I really enjoy it. I like working on a section of the forest at a time and cleaning it up. Exposing that nice moss that's hidden beneath the needles. I've got my sandy section out front here. Wow, these needles come off in a big clump. That's all right. It's possible I might put this forest in the Toronto Bonsai show, the spring show this year. I've never had it in the Toronto Bonsai Society's show. It was on the calendar. We had an informal meet in the parking lot, like a boot sale or a trunk sale, and it got featured in the calendar, but it's never been in the Toronto show. So I'll clean it up with the, with the intention of showing it this year. It'll be kind of exciting. And I don't think in the calendar, the last time people have seen it, it was before I put this waterfall down the middle here. So I don't think they've seen it with the new landscape yet. And I was looking back at the old landscape, it looked pretty good too. I kind of had sort of steps up in this area. It was just a little different, but it looked quite nice. Maybe I'll end up changing this once again, who knows. I'll have a good look at the landscape at the end of the day and decide if I want to make any changes to it. I know there was a few trees that I wanted to rotate slightly, maybe repot a little different position. I think this one I wanted to raise up a bit. So there might be a little, repotting this spring. I don't think there'll be any major changes, but always, trying to make the planting look better and better with each bit of work I do on it. Sometimes landscapes, you need to look at them for a year before you kind of figure out what changes you want to make. And sometimes the changes are really subtle that, no one else would notice, but you do, because you've been studying the planting so long that, certain things might stand out to you as less than perfect or need improvement. It's another cloudy day today. We haven't had any sun in about 3 weeks now, so it's been a very dark winter, and I think most of that is due to the warm temperatures. We're kind of hovering around the freezing mark. Normally this time of the year we're like deep in the cold weather and snow. This year it's been very mild and hardly any snow. We had that one big snowstorm, and we had snow earlier in fall, but it's been very snow-free this winter so far anyway. There's still a long way to go. I mean, we've got another 2.5 months of winter still, but yeah, so far it's been very, very mild and dark, which isn't good for the tropical trees inside. It's kind of hard on those, especially the ones near the window. They could certainly do with a day of sunshine. It would perk them all up. But I don't know. I looked at the weather forecast and there's no sun coming anytime in the future. So luckily the grow lights in the plant room are helping the trees out. Otherwise it would be very, very dark in there. I like doing this. Every time you remove needles, the landscape looks more realistic and more miniature. And more colorful. The moss starts shining through. All that nice green. It also feels like you're in a forest. It really gives you that impression. It's kind of cool. That's what I call being in the bonsai zone. When you get that feeling like you're in a forest. It would be nice to add some other kind of ground covers to this forest. And I'll see what I can find. Maybe some thyme or something. Something with flowers would look really good in spring. If I can, I'll just have to scour the nurseries when it's getting close to showtime and see if I can find some kind of fine ground cover that is in flower. That would look really cool. Just add little bushes around the forest floor. I was complaining about how dark the winter was and how we haven't had sunshine in like 3 weeks. And today, the sun is starting to come out. The skies are clearing up a bit. I can see some actual blue up there, which is very exciting. So that's nice. The plants in the plant room will be smiling today. I'm making good progress with the cleaning up of all the needles. It takes a while, but it's really nice. I enjoy studying the landscape when I'm doing this. You kind of focus in on one little bit of it. It's kind of cool. Yeah, I don't mind doing this at all. I could do this all day. I've already got a few ideas for improvements on this. I think one, I've got to improve my stream area. Somehow, I'm going to have to try and make it look a little more realistic, I think. Now, I was looking back at the old calendar that this larch forest is in, and it had a lot of the new rocks in place, but it didn't have this waterfall down the middle, and it had my old moss bushes at the back. Birds kept knocking them off. That's the reason I don't have any at the moment, so I'll have to try and develop new ones. Because I do like the moss bushes. I think they add a cool, realistic element to the forest. My goal for the landscape in this forest is to have every little section of the forest floor to be different. So you see the overall picture of the forest with the trees, and then if you go in, you can see the detailed areas. So just like when you walk through a forest, you might see this really cool ground cover in one section of the forest. Then you'll walk a little further down the trail, and then you'll see like a little pond, which has a totally different scenery. And then you'll walk a little further, and maybe the ground cover changes again, and it's more grassy or reedy. And so I want your eye to kind of follow around the landscape and discover new things every time you look at it. So, there's this area down here that's, the water's edge. So maybe having some reeds or something along there. And then as you go up the hill, maybe the ground cover changes. So I wanted this tapestry of different plants and textures. So it just encourages you to look all around the landscape and discover new things. And I think that would be cool. So it's a tall task. I'm going to have to find lots of different mosses and plants and things to kind of bring this to reality. But that's my goal anyway, and I'm slowly working away at it. I think I'll just keep trying to make each little section of the forest a little different and interesting. I'm working away out front here, and I thought one thing that could be cool in this planting is to have a cave. And I was thinking right here underneath this rock, so I'd have to move this moss bush out of the way and then make an opening in here. I think that would kind of be cool. So I'm going to try that. I'm going to see if this moss bush removes easily. Yeah, it's not too bad. The birds always kick these things off. Okay. So I can reposition this somewhere else. I'll set it to the side here. So underneath here I could have like a little cave. Now I have a rock here that I could move out of the way. I'll set that aside too. And maybe in here. Now it doesn't have to be like a really big cave or anything, but just like a crevice that opens up. And this is another one of those little features I was talking about that I think will make the planting more exciting. That, you know, as I said, you'll explore each little section and you'll find interesting features in each little section of the forest. So already this looks kind of cool with just the undercut here underneath the rock. It's another element that is interesting. And it's a subtle one. It doesn't take away from the overall view of the forest. You don't want things that stand out so much that, you know, that's the first thing your eye goes to. You want subtle features that you can explore. Yeah, so there's kind of an opening in here. Now, I don't know how deep I can make it, but there's something there. The element is there. So I think that's cool. I think it's a nice little feature to add to the planting. It's subtle, but there's something in there. Definitely. Now I like that. It breaks up the landscape. It has a dark area here. I think that's really nice. You can imagine, you know, a bear coming out here, walking on the edge of the rocks here, going into the water here, doing some fishing. Here's a look at the little cave from the front by the water's edge. The sun has cleared the pine tree there, but there's a lot of clouds in the way, but it's trying to come out. It's certainly brighter than it has been in the last 3 weeks. So it's good to see a little bit of sun. I'm going to relocate that clump of moss that I took off the front of the planting and put it up on top of the hill here. There used to be a moss clump here, but it got kicked away by birds. So yeah, I'll put it right there. That should be a good place for it. Lots more needle cleanup to do. The landscape's looking quite different now. It's greening up with all the moss exposed. These landscapes take a lot of time, but they sure are worth it, I think. Plus, you can really use your imagination and come up with any landscape you can think of. Use any trees you want, any style of landscape. Even fantasy landscapes are cool. I'm going to have to try and find those miniature ferns. They're not a fern, but they look like ferns. Plant those around. I think that would really look good in this landscape, just to have some ferns. And I found the ferns, but they were purple colored. I used to have some green ones. It's a ground cover. I forget the name of it, but yeah, I found it again, but they're all purple leaves on it. I didn't want purple leaves in my landscape, so I'll still have to look around for the green version. I thought about sinking like a dead branch in the sand here to look like it's underwater or half submerged. That might look good. I can look around and see if I have like a branch that I've pruned off a tree that looks miniature that would look good sunk in here. I'll do that now. I'll see if I can find something that would look nice in this sand layer here. I found a branch off a larch, a dead larch. So I was going to try putting that. Now it can't be, if you imagine the stream coming down, anything had kind of washed to the edge of the water somewhere. So I've got to place it somewhere where it would look kind of realistic. Maybe kind of sticking out over the top of the rock here. I'll try that. It looks okay there. Maybe try it around the other way. Like that. That looks okay. It's something there that adds a bit of interest. You know, it's another thing. You've got your cave, the waterfall, cool rocks, sort of a branch coming out of the water here. It's something for the eye to look at. So I'll leave it there. I can always change my mind later on. But for now, there's a feature, another feature, detail feature in the planting. So this sand, I tried some white sand by the waterfall, and it looked okay. But I don't know, we'll maybe try that again. White sand coming down the waterfall and then sort of changing to the brown sand down here. It would be kind of cool to have like a deer drinking at the edge of the water here, but I think that would be, it would stick out too much, as like your eye would just go to the deer the first thing. And I think it's better to imagine the deer in this forest coming down to the water's edge. Just like the cave, you might imagine a bear living in that cave, but you don't actually see the bear. So you don't want everything obvious in a planting. You want your imagination to run wild. You also have to make sure you don't disrupt the scale of the planting by placing a miniature in it, like an animal or something. Right now, if you look at this forest, there's a certain scale value you perceive. You imagine the trees to be a certain size. So if I were to plant a person here, like my Frankenstein, you can see how that just ruins the scale of the planting. I mean, obviously, this is too large a thing to put in the planting. Let's try something smaller. Here's a little dog. I could put the dog there. And you can see the dog is a better scale. It looks closer, but I still think the dog is a little big. I think, you know, it looks a little large for the scale of the forest I imagine. I've got a zebra here. Now, a zebra wouldn't be in this setting, but if we picture that maybe as a deer, again, I think that's just a little bit larger scale. I think I would need something even more miniature to kind of suit the landscape. Here's a Land Rover sitting there, and I think that's too small. I think the scale is too miniature. It looks a bit out of place. So I think, you know, the dog is probably, it's still a little big, isn't it? But getting closer to the scale. Let me see what else I have. I have a little plastic sheep here. Well, that's looking pretty good. Let's see. Put the sheep up on the rock here. Yeah, that looks about the right scale to me. You can imagine a person kind of this high. But I think, you know, the landscape doesn't need a figurine in here. If I take that away, you can still imagine the size of the landscape. And some people may imagine it larger, and some people might imagine it smaller. But I think everyone who looks at this planting will kind of picture their own scale of how high a person would be in this planting. You know, some people might picture a person quite tall. Some people might picture a person quite small. When I'm looking at a bonsai, I always try and picture what scale the tree is at. So how high would a person be if they're standing next to the tree? And if the bonsai conveys an image of scale, if you can picture a person beside it, I think it's a successful miniature tree. If you look at it and it just has you have no idea how big a person would be. It looks, maybe the tree is like an abstract tree or, you know, driftwood art, and you just can't imagine how high the tree would be if you saw it in real life. I think then it's less successful as a miniature tree. It may be more of an art form, but it's not like a miniature tree. And I like my bonsai to have some kind of scale value, to have a realistic element to them, so you can see, you look at the tree and you say, yeah, a person would be about this big, or a person would be this big. And I think that's a successful bonsai when you can, it sort of shrinks the viewer down to a certain size and you're looking at the tree as a miniature person, if that makes sense. I'm going to try a fun experiment. What I'm going to do is take a picture of myself, and then I'm going to, in Photoshop or GIMP, I'm going to take the picture of me and add it to my landscape here, try different scale sizes and see what looks the best. I think it'd be fun to try that. So I'll do that. I'll go outside. I've got the same lighting as this. I'll take a picture of myself from the same angle and shrink myself down and put it in the landscape. Sketchy. So there's my picture of me. So I'll cut it out and add it to the landscape. Now I gotta get down without falling. Here is my shot of the landscape now. And now, here is me in the landscape. So here's me large. Now I'm shrinking myself down to smaller. A little larger now. I think somewhere about here looks right. That was an interesting experiment. You can try it with your own trees. Get a picture of yourself and kind of scale yourself up and down until you see a scale value that looks right for your tree. It's just an interesting experiment to try. So now I'll get back to picking more larch needles off the forest floor. I've been at this pretty well all afternoon. It's quite cool here today in the greenhouse, so my hands are getting quite cold. But I'm enjoying it. I really enjoy doing this. Clean up work on your landscape. Every needle you pull makes it look better and better. More miniature looking, without all that kind of coarse needle debris on the moss. So I'm definitely going to try and find some different kinds of mosses and add clumps of it Now, not all moss will live in this planting, so I'll have to do it before the show. Because, you know, you can take moss from different areas of a forest or something, plant them in your bonsai, and it doesn't mean the moss is going to live. Some moss needs very specific lighting conditions, humidity, and you'll find that, you know, maybe one type of moss will be successful in your bonsai, and another type of moss, you just have no luck with it. It just doesn't have the right conditions. It could be the acidity of the soil. It could be, the light, humidity, maybe the moisture levels of the soil or something like that. You know, how fast it dries out. The only thing about doing this work is it makes me think of spring. I'm seeing all this green moss, and it looks like the promise of spring, which is a little ways away. Quite a bit away. I'm going to zoom in on the forest at some of the areas where I've got the needles cleaned out, and you'll see what it looks like. Very miniature looking, I think. And then if I go around the back to some of the areas that have needles all over it, like here, you can see, like, it doesn't look horrible, but it looks cluttered and almost, it may be more realistic, but it looks messy. And I think, you know, something like this, it may look more like a fantasy landscape because it's clean looking and everything's, I don't know, maybe more of a summer appearance, or I don't know what the word is, but it's a different look for sure. So I think it's, you know, I think this looks, I think it looks less miniature because the needles just aren't the right scale for the trees. It just, so I think the cleanup is really, I think it really helps miniaturize the planting, having, you know, all the needles cleaned away. So I'm happy with the progress. I'm definitely still working away, and it's getting later in the afternoon, but if I have to come back tomorrow, well, I'll come back tomorrow because I still have pruning to do in the upper canopies. Here's an update to the landscape. So I've got a lot of the front of the planting all cleaned up of needles. But I still have a lot of work around the back here. You can see the needles all over the back of the hill. But it's made good progress today, that's for sure. I'm very, very happy with the planting. I have been picking needles off my larch forest all afternoon. The light is starting to fade. It's getting dark out. My hands are cold. I'm cold. It's time to pack it in for today, but I'm going to continue on the work tomorrow. I'm really enjoying this cleanup of the landscape, and I'm going to add details to it. I'm going to prune up the trees tomorrow, so it'll be fun to see this further refinement into day 2. So that's all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.